My girlfriend wants an open relationship. I'm a young man, male 32, and I have been dating my girlfriend, female 28, for close to 9 years now. We started dating in high school, and ever since, she hasn't had any other relationship, and she feels we should explore other options. I cannot understand what brought on that idea, or why, but I am certain I will never do this. I see an open relationship as a poor excuse for an affair. Saying I loathe cheating is an understatement. I could never stand it. I have seen what it does to couples, and I don't want that heartache. I come from a family that was ruined because of cheating. My parents have been in love for as long as I can remember. And just when we least expected it, there was an affair, and it ruined our home. Today, my mom and dad barely speak to each other. I was 14 when I started to notice the change in my home. Dad came home late, and my mom became withdrawn. This was strange to me for a child who grew up to loving parents, family dinner, gifts, and all. I didn't understand why my dad always came home late now while my mom said nothing. I guess things were going behind the back door. I was left out. Then my older and only sister started acting up too. She insisted she was going to school in a faraway country. The shock came when nobody said anything or tried to stop her. The old family would have insisted she stay close to home. I went to my sister that night to ask what had happened. Then we heard the noise. Unlike mine, her room is on the same floor as my parents'. I live downstairs, and the building is soundproof. You could hardly hear what went on in the other room unless the door was opened. That night, the door was opened, and I listened despite what Mom keeps saying. Eavesdropping was wrong. I heard all the horrible details of my father cheating on my mom. The hurtful way she sounded made me run toward their room. My sister ran after me and pulled me back. She shook her head as she wordlessly warned me not to interfere. Once in the room, she told me to stay put. "This is their war. We cannot do anything about it." My once loving family didn't quite recover from that episode. I still don't know the details, but I know what it did to our home. I vowed never to be that kind of man who ruined my family, and I would never condone a woman who cheats too. Meeting my girlfriend is a topic I never get tired of talking about. I was the school's favorite rugby star, and she was a transferred student. She came into our school looking hot and sweet. Everyone fell for her drip. One thing then about being transferred was all eyes were on you. Unfortunately, my girl didn't like the attention. She was the shy type. At least she was back in school. I remember the day she walked into the high school. I had just finished my game and was coming back with my team. There was a whole crowd cheering as we walked in. As the captain, I was in the front with 2 teammates carrying me on their shoulders. 2 held my legs as we danced and clapped excitedly. Everyone was cheering and clapping. Everyone except for this girl who looked so lost amidst the crowd. I didn't see the look, actually. I was more entranced by her innocent beauty. She was a chestnut-haired girl back then, contrasting to the red-haired woman now. The breeze blew as we opened the door, blowing away her hair everywhere while she struggled calmly to fix it in place. No one paid attention, but I did. "Oh, that's Rochelle, the new girl," whispered one of my teammates as we walked past her. He had noticed how I remained fixated on her. "She's in our class, dude." Shaking my head, I nodded and turned towards the jocks. But though I turned away, the face was imprinted on my memory, and so was the name. I wanted to ask when she resumed and how I was meeting her. Knowing what the answer would be, I didn't bother to ask. I was mostly always practicing lately. This was rugby season, and I loved the game. Well, that and the issues we were having back at home. Mom was moody, and Dad was never home. The girl was what I had, and I spent most of my time there. So either the new girl had been introduced while I wasn't in class, or she hadn't. I wouldn't know. The next day, I walked into class expectantly. I was particularly looking for her. As I walked into class, I did a quick sweep of everywhere. She wasn't there. With deep regret, I went to my seat. So much for missing rehearsals today. The science teacher walked in then, and, seeing me in class, joked about me gracing him with my presence. I smiled. He was teasing me. Whatever high mood got me in class today was fast dropping. And I didn't even know why. Halfway through class, the teacher suddenly stopped, and there was my girl. I smiled as she stopped in front of the class. She was apologizing for something, but I barely heard. All I noticed was that her hair was neatly packed today, and that she was as beautiful as I thought. The teacher waved her to sit, and I was waving that she take the seat beside me. "Oh," the whole class chorused. I intentionally went blank on them, pretending not to know what they meant. The seat beside me was never taken. No one except my teammates was allowed there. It was like an unspoken rule. I think it was left out of respect for the team's captain, but I didn't ask for it. The specs of being a school favorite. People loved me. The love didn't end only when I was playing. It goes on right in the class, at the park, almost everywhere. My schoolmates fight over me. They fight for me. I've seen girls go gaga over whoever dared badmouth me. So generally, I was the golden boy. And I think my family also solidified that. I'm from one of the prominent families in LA, and my family may have been involved in funding 1 or 2 school projects. So everyone knows my sister and me, my older sister. She graduated a couple of years back and had left the city. My parents were planning to return, but it was more of a publicity stunt than love. We didn't want to be a part of that, so my sister blatantly refused to come home. Most people didn't know this. The word on the street was that my mom had to visit her family in Texas and would be back. Only a few people knew what had happened, and by a few, I mean myself, my sister, mom, dad, and probably the lady he cheated with. That singular act made my dad lose the respect we had for him. As the new girl walked to my seat, I shook my head to throw my mind off that sour topic. She smiled and sat when I patted the seat beside me for her to sit. I nodded and waited until the class wasn't paying attention to us, but to the teacher before looking her over. And I kept stealing glances at her all throughout the day. We spoke a few times, just random talks, but I knew I wanted to find out more about this girl, who she was, where she was from, everything. Before the close of the school that day, I managed to talk her into getting a ride home with me. She obliged, saying that her mom would be picking her up. And she wasn't even staying along my route, but who cares? I don't mind the trip. Still, we talked out of class that day, holding hands amidst loud whistling and catcalls. People must have been cheering, not just me now, but the new girl. Though I didn't ask her out yet, I knew I liked her. Walking her out was me saying the other guys should back off. She is spectacular. We became friends since she had a permanent spot beside me. We also exchanged numbers and we chatted back and forth, sending text messages now and then. Before long, we were an item. I didn't ask her out, but it was obvious what I wanted. I was biding my time. The rugby team and some other guys who might have been interested knew they stood no chance, so they backed off. That didn't stop my teammates from teasing me mercilessly, though. My friendship bloomed very quickly with the new girl. Ours was love at first sight. I liked her a lot. There were so many things we shared in common. That kind of hastened the relationship. We became inseparable, so much so that the school's gossip page picked on it. They gave us a nickname, and it stuck. Everyone seems to approve, everyone except my therapist. Due to what was happening back home, my dad insisted we all go for therapy. The man seems to think getting romantically involved with a girl might not be the best for me. I didn't know where he got his theory from, but I knew this wasn't me finding love aside from home. He made me promise not to make her my girlfriend yet and enjoy the friendship we shared until I was certain I wanted to do this. To be sure I wasn't acting out, I did wait. I didn't tell Rochelle what I wanted in so many words. I left her to make her deductions. The silence hurt me more than it did her. As I delayed making my intentions known, my friends teased me. They wanted to know why their so bold captain was slacking here. I kept my secret to myself since I could understand they also meant well. Before that, I was heartbroken by my girlfriend, which is a whole new story. The girl I was dating dumped me for the star player of our school's rival. She played me. I was a mess when that happened. I started dating my girlfriend, Pell, because we were the school's darlings. I wouldn't call it dating anyway, since we were all just high school kids fooling around. Our relationship was more of a collaboration, if anything. We were the darlings of the school. I was the golden boy, the school's rugby captain and all. She was the school's head cheerleader, and she is hot. Everyone just assumed we were made for each other, and they pushed us to each other. Then, Pell was all over me too, and I had no choice. She liked me, I guess. As the school's golden girl, dating me would look great on a resume of social cliches, but she was as vague about what she wanted. We were together for over a year. Dating her was so much work because Pell was a drama queen. She wanted me all over her as she was all over me. I had to go to her rehearsals as the supporting boyfriend, and I must fight when she was insulted for starting a fight in the first place. When she sneezed, I needed to be rushing forward with a tissue paper. That is what her ex-boyfriend did. Unfortunately, I couldn't do all of that. My training had me away most of the time. Though it took me a while, Pell eventually got it. I couldn't be that person for her, but she loved the attention our relationship gave her. So she accepted what she had. On the contrary, though, I wasn't in the loop. Whatever and whenever chance she had, I did those things. She made me run errands and do annoying things. I even had to fight people for her. I wasn't mean to people. I couldn't. but she was all of that herself. I just had to do the cleaning up without her knowing. People call me the sweet one in the relationship and wonder why I was with her. Outside, my ex could be all sorts of mean, but she never jokes about her man. I was her priority when she needed to make me that. Loving her was complicated. One minute, we were good and laughing. The next, we would be walking hurriedly away from each other. Then came the intruder. While practicing for one of my intensive games, I started to pull away from Pell. But it wasn't intentional. We had this game with our school's #1 enemy and rival. Even our coaches were on edge. We had to put in more extra time practicing as we would die. It was either we win or go through another embarrassing fate at the hands of the rival team. Last year they won us pants down, and we were the joke for weeks, even months. We didn't want that this year, so we worked overtime. Somehow, while all this was going on, Pell became the center of things. As our cheerleader, she worked with her members on the best dance steps. So I assumed she had stuff to handle too. Unlike ours though, their rehearsals came along well, and she was always around my practice to watch me play. At one of our rehearsals, we were suddenly told the coach from the other team had come to visit with his captain. Rehearsal stopped immediately as the two coaches, ours and the other one, started to exchange sly comments. The rival coach wanted us to stop rehearsing so much as we would never be good enough. He teased us ruthlessly, but we accepted this. He always does this. One thing to know is we don't always lose to this school. 3 years back, we won them flat down, but that was it. They have always been the best in rugby. And winning against them that once was merely a coincidence, but it opened our eyes to two things. One is that the school wasn't unbeatable. Two, we really could do this. Tired as we may, we haven't beaten them ever since. But here was another chance to try at it. While the coaches were in heated chat, I noticed the captain and Pell were having their banter. But for some reason, my ex was enjoying this. I mean, she was throwing shades at this guy and laughing. Pell never did that unless she is excited. She couldn't be, not in that situation. That's what I thought. To my surprise, she was. I stormed to where the two were and pulled my girl away. The other captain smirked and left. That was how both Pell and the captain met. Over time, she would ask me about him from me and how our rehearsal was going. Though she came from my practice, she was increasingly distracted and always wanted to talk about the rival team. I didn't read much meaning into it until the game started. Amidst the shades throwing, I guess Pell and the rival school's captain found common ground. They kissed, and I didn't know about it until the gossip column aired it. I had lost my girl to the rival captain, my worst enemy. I took consolation in the fact that we won the game, but my pride was hurt, and I sulked for days. Thankfully, my fans were there for me. Sly comments were being passed here and there. It was a difficult time for Pell. Seeing her become the object of so much shame made me get over the hurt quickly. I also joined in the tease, and finally, I let it go. She wasn't worth it. That was 2 years ago, and I was ready to move on. I think the school was ready for me too, to be with someone. Only no one suspected it would be the new girl they barely knew. The gossip column again helped. The writer, whoever it was, urged me to make a move. It would be better for a new girl than anyone in school, it said. In a way, I guess people were cheering me on to date this new girl. I waited though, as my therapist instructed. I needed to be sure I was ready. Well, like it was in high school, some didn't like our friendship. Guys. But it wasn't just guys now. I also noticed that some girls were beginning to be mean to her. But Rochelle is smart. She immediately knew the reason for the new hostility. The once single, most eligible player is off the hook. That's what she said. I listened as she explained how, as a fan, she would have been disappointed too. "It's like watching your crush announce this girl," she laughed. At the time, I didn't understand. What happens with a player having a woman? After all, they do have their lovers too. But I guess all these things happen. I would later understand this too because I not only became the new girl's boyfriend, I also became her cheerleader. Finally, my therapist gave me the go-ahead. I passed his test. Since I could proceed now, I decided to make a big deal about our relationship. I had to announce my relationship with her publicly. Right after one of my best games, I made the announcement. She had come, of course, to cheer me on and had no idea what I was thinking. I made sure she came there dressed for the occasion. I got her a lovely dress to wear to the games. It was a sporting outfit, and when she tried it out for me, it was her perfect fit. After the game, she ran out to hug me. I just grabbed the mic and shouted, "My girl!" and I kissed her fully on the lips. She was flustered, and she liked it. After that, I whispered in her ears if she would be my girlfriend. Tearfully, she accepted. I gave my guys the thumbs up, which meant she accepted. The DJ lit up the whole arena with a romantic ambiance. For days, we were the talk of the town. Some openly congratulated us, and some were openly rude as well. I heard so many nasty comments. Some mean jokes were said about the new girl and how she had wiggled her way into the school's golden boy lap. It wasn't nice on my girl, but she carried her shoulders high. But the best was, we had more people on our side than against us. Somehow, though, I caused this. Announcing the relationship broke the hearts of my fans. To them, I was no longer available. Rochelle would later say that had she been my manager, she wouldn't have advised that I announce our relationship that way. But I was young and in love. Who cared what other people thought? One other thing is, Rochelle suffered in so many backlashes. The school's gossip column picked on why she transferred and dug into her background. It turns out she had to transfer not just because her mother changed jobs. As a matter of fact, the change of job was because of what had happened. It would appear that the new girl had stepped on bigger toes there. I didn't need to know what happened, but I could tell she was so hurt that the gossip column dug out her past. Rather than be angry, she didn't tell me any of this. I stood up for her defense. She eventually told me the actual story. It wasn't even what anyone thought. I wanted to correct the column and make them apologize to her, but she insisted it wasn't worth it. That it was stale gist. I said nothing. Behind her, though, I asked for help and got the writer's identity. I then made her post an apology for posting about my girl when she didn't have the facts. When the article came out, Rochelle suspected I had a hand in it. I shrugged and said nothing. If only that were all we faced in high school. I also remember that the column hinted that she might have been after my money. You see, she was from a humble background, unlike me, who came from a family of affluence. And it was to assume she was with me for the money. In reality, though, Rochelle refused to collect anything from me. The only time I gave her something she didn't return was her prom dress. In fact, getting her food was a tug of war. Rochelle and I became so in love I was always longing to be with her. School prom came and went. Whatever I had done wrong when I announced our relationship paid off. We were crowned the best couple of the year. My announcement video was played as contributing to that. "See that, babe?" I said, kissing her happily. It didn't matter if I did wrong or if I might have ruined something. After prom, we all left school to wait for our school results. I had picked Stanford and wasn't sure what Rochelle had picked. I wanted to know, but I guess the fear of parting ways didn't look palatable for me. And I did tell her mine. She chose not to tell me hers. Perhaps she wanted me to ask. Well, I got my admission letter before hers, and I was in. I didn't know what to tell her. Going to Stanford meant I would be miles away from my girlfriend if she remained here. It was too much to handle. We had been together for 2 sweet years, and I wasn't ready to end it. For days, I couldn't work up the courage to tell her I got admitted. Whenever we were together, I avoided the topic. Finally, I needed to start getting ready to leave. It was pointless not talking about this, so I called her for a date, and I planned on telling her about leaving. As we ate, Rochelle knew something was up with me. "Why are you so fidgety? It's unlike you," she stated. I jumped right at that opportunity and told her I would be going to Stanford. "Oh, I knew that already." That was her calm response. I dropped my cutlery and stopped eating. She knew? How? She laughed and said we spoke about this, remember? Then she narrated how I had told her about the school I had chosen. "I didn't want to say goodbye so soon, so I chose Stanford too," she said. It turned out that she had a surprise for me too. She brought out a letter and nudged me to read. When I picked it up to read, I saw that it was her acceptance letter. Stanford? I was shocked. She started to cry then. I didn't know what the tears were for. I held her to me. Maybe she was excited we would be together. I am too, just not this excited. We started planning to leave for Stanford. I got everything I needed in twos against her protest, and I made sure she had all she needed. I was opportune to get a cool space close to school while she was to stay in the hostel. With everything in place, we fixed the date to move to school. I needed to get some things from my sister, who was coming home the following weekend. My family was whole again. We weren't perfect yet, but it was worth celebrating, and my sister was coming too. She insisted I wait to get some materials from her, but I knew it was so she could see me before leaving for school. But waiting for her meant I would be a week late for resumption. That wasn't a problem. The only issue was Rochelle, who was traveling with me. At the time, we didn't know. We only felt we would be a week behind schedule. Unfortunately, when we got to school, Rochelle had no boarding room to stay in. It was all fine by me to have her move to my room. After all, I caused this. Her mother didn't like the suggestion, but we had no choice. Having tried every other option. The only room available had 4 occupants already, and the last person had called to say she would be coming down the next day. That is how my girlfriend and I ended up living together all through college, and it was fun. We were a couple, and I loved that. All through school, we lived together. Because the apartment was spacious, we could throw parties whenever we wanted. We also had friends staying over. Sometimes her friends and sometimes mine spend the weekend. It was never an issue. Although now, I do remember once that my friend stayed over. I met Blake in college. Like me, he was a rugby player and good looking too. We hit it off immediately. We became good friends and were always together. He was in the same class as me. When he came over, it became a burden to our relationship. I quietly got him out. Rochelle and I had different schedules. Though we were both at Stanford, we weren't taking the same class. She was studying business administration while I studied family law. That meant we didn't have the class time and didn't move with the same friends. I don't think we changed in school. I feel like we grew, but growth didn't stop our relationship. It was true we had our ups and downs, but we obviously loved each other so much that we dated all through the 4 years in school. College was unlike high school. Nobody had your time. No teacher to monitor your back and forth, even though you were all well known. It was almost easy to get lost in the crowd. Fortunately, I wasn't deemed for that kind of life. My prestige from high school awaited me in college. The moment I resumed, I was the school's golden boy once again. But this time, it was different. It was like everyone knew you, yet no one cared what you did. And sure, nobody judged you for being with someone. I also realized that someone completely shielded could become an entirely different person. That was the only thing about Rochelle that hit me. She might not have been the golden girl in high school, but she was in college. Rochelle challenged the lecturer in one of the classes as she narrated. She had been paired with some others on a project. As the spokesperson, she was delegated to represent her peers in the school debate, and she floored it. However, a particular lecturer wasn't satisfied. He kept throwing questions at her, to which she had prompt answers. Ultimately, he dropped the case and declared her his best study. That got my girl her opening. She became his PA, amongst others. He bombarded her with so much work. She didn't complain, but I could see she struggled to keep up. I not only became her cheerleader, but I also had to step up and work with her. Rochelle's new role as the class rep meant she had many friends. Most of her course mates always called her for information and whatevs. She was always on the phone. It wasn't a big deal for me, but those periods had us not at our best. We were barely speaking, though we lived together. I was either off to lecture or she was. In the evenings, when we were together, she would be on the phone half the time. Once I started noticing I was losing my girl to college, I sorted that out. I had to initiate date nights for evenings. Sometimes, I slipped her phone back into the room so we wouldn't be interrupted. And to play fair, I do drop mine. She caught me once I was trying to keep her phone away. I had to complain while she had to go with me without her phone. She was a bit disappointed that I had been doing this without speaking to her about it. I sat her down and asked her how she would feel if I said her studies were stealing her away from me. Rochelle said nothing for a long time. She stared at me as she gave it a thought. My girlfriend is a sweet lady. She could be as daunting and as loving as she could. Still looking at me, her brow furrowed into a tight frown, suddenly lightened. The next instant, she had a sad smile and was smiling at me. Then she pulled me in for a hug, apologizing sadly. "I'm so sorry, and I didn't know this." I didn't mind that she was hugging me from behind. Bending, I lifted her on my back and turned her until she was in front of me, still clinging to me. We never had the chance to go for a date night that evening. We made love passionately. It had been a while since we had that. For some time, Rochelle was the sweetest as she ensured schoolwork didn't affect our relationship. Sometimes I caught her deliberately ignoring calls when with me. I had to let her know I didn't mind. I was not just her man, but her cheerleader. She had been there for me in school too. The least I could do was watch how it felt to be the cheerleader and not the superstar. And in all sincerity, I meant that. Couples who lived together would testify that relationships could be a hassle. Rochelle and I had ours too. It wasn't all rosy for us. We had moments that stuck in memory, and we had times when we didn't know how we could get past the situation we were in. One such incident that almost ended our relationship happened in our 3rd year in school. I had come home from class one day terribly exhausted. The door was locked, but that wasn't a big deal. We both had our key. Sliding the key in, I opened the door. I was met by a strange guy, half naked and looking so comfortable in our home. "Who's that?" Rochelle asked, coming from the inner room. I looked from the guy to her, wondering who the hell he was. Rochelle pulled me into the room to explain that the guy was her course mate. He had nowhere to stay, and she had asked that he stay with us while he sorted his accommodation issue out. He was a transfer student, and he had nowhere to go. Okay, let me point out that I understand that as a transfer student once or twice, it is understandable that she would feel the need to help out. Secondly, she was the course rep and might have felt this was a duty she could provide, especially since she had the means to that end. Lastly, this wasn't a big deal. I mean, we had people stay with us all the time. Her friends have stayed with us, and so have mine. However, this particular one didn't present itself right to me. He was a guy, for Pete's sake, not the usual friend. Plus, he had this air around him that I didn't like. I went to the living room again to be sure I got this right. Yes, the man definitely had an attitude for someone who didn't own the house. He looked too comfortable. I don't like this, I told my girlfriend. You didn't ask me about it first. And even as I gave excuses, I knew that wasn't it. I was just not okay with a guy in our home. Of course, Rochelle was flustered. She had assumed I would be fine with it. I usually was. She tried to plead with me to understand and let the guy stay for some days. I wasn't having that. I wanted him dressed and out of the apartment immediately. When the pleading fell on deaf ears, my girlfriend became upset. She insisted I was that way because it was my place and she didn't have a say. That shut me up. I don't particularly appreciate when she pulled the "you're privileged" card on me. It makes me look untouchable and above her. I sat down then and nodded that he could stay. Only for some days, I told her. She was happy, and she hugged me with so much relief.